And we're live. Welcome, everybody. Give just a few minutes for people to trickle in before we get started. Welcome to our webinar. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I feel like we need some good welcoming music.
Yeah, maybe some
our webinars are missing.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. Serena, would you mind making me a host for just a minute so I can post this to Facebook Live?
Of course.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Give it just another minute. Okay, well, I suppose I can get started. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Diving into Drip Irrigation 2. This webinar is brought to you by Daily Axe, the City of Cotati, and Sonoma Water. Before we dive into drip this evening, I wanted to give a brief introduction to Daily Axe, to Kris Loomis, who's here with Sonoma Water, and go over some Zoom etiquette that we have for you guys. So my name is Serena, and I'm a programs coordinator at Daily Axe. Daily Axe is a holistic education nonprofit that takes a heart-centered approach to inspiring transformative actions to create a more connected, equitable, and climate-resilient community. We believe in the power of our daily actions to reconnect people to self, community, and place, which helps heal our society and our planet. Our holistic approach starts in the soil and swells into culture and policy change. The chart you see below is our theory of change. We believe that the crisis of connection is at the core of our environment and social issues that we face today. Our holistic approach to addressing the crisis starts in the soil and swells into culture and policy change. We spread solutions and models to offer the skills and tools to conserve resources while growing food, medicine, habitat, and community. Because change happens through collaboration, we also invest in strengthening community leadership by equipping leaders who understand the interrelations of social, economic, and environmental justice issues through our networks, alliances, and leadership programs. This includes our Leadership Institute, the North Bay Environmental Health Network, and our most recently Eco to School program for local high school students. These efforts consolidate into building public and political will by mobilizing our community's powers towards environmental and climate justice policies. Our impact over the last 18 years has been to create solutions and models that ripple through our community, catalyzing action, building community, and supporting leaders to boldly advocate for a brighter future. We've implemented over 1,400 programs, inspired tens and thousands of resilience building projects, installed dozens of demonstration gardens for fire survivors, homeless veterans, and schools. And in the last 5 years of record drought, flood, and fire, we've launched several new coalitions, as well as new programs to support our vulnerable populations. Before we fully get started tonight, I just wanted to go over a few little Zoom housekeeping rules. So tonight, we'd love if you'd use the chat box to share statements with the whole group. Make sure that you have it set to everybody and not just panelists or hosts if you want to share with everybody who's here tonight. Use the question and answer box to share questions you have coming into the webinar. Feel free to add any questions that might come up to you also throughout the webinar. We'll answer all your questions at the end. And any resources and links that are brought up throughout the presentation, don't worry about scribbling them down. We'll actually send you a follow-up email after this with everything that you'll need. So now, without further ado, I'd love to introduce our special guest, Kris. Kris has a passion for irrigation and gadgets like no other. Her 20+ years of experience and understanding of irrigation components, along with her ability to present complex items in simple terms, will make you feel at ease. She holds a certificate in an irrigation design CID and landscape irrigation audit CLIA from the irrigation. Did I just freeze?
Ever so slightly, but we got the gist.
Kris, welcome on.
Thank you. Okay, I went blank there for just a second. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. I'm going to go ahead and share with you my screen.
Gotta love the Zoom era.
Okay, how's that look?
Perfect.
Great. Okay, well, I'm very excited to be here tonight for this second round of diving into drip. So hopefully, if we run into a few things that might be a little deeper dive than you feel comfortable with, then always feel free to go back to dailyax.org and watch the first series and get caught up to speed, and then watch this one again. So very excited to be here. Like they said, my name is Kris Loomis. I work for Sonoma Water, and super excited to see that it's finally started raining. And just remember that we're just coming into the end of the 3 driest years that we've had in a very long time. And we've got a lot of reservoirs to fill and hopefully keep them nice and full. And right now we get to relax a little bit, but come spring, you never know. We might be having another seminar where we're asking you to buckle down and conserve, because no matter what, there's never enough to waste. So anyway, let's get started. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to have a poll question just to kind of get our feelers out there of where people are at and what type of systems they have already. So if you want to go ahead when the poll pops up, go ahead and fill that out. And we'll give it a second here for people to go ahead and answer. And remember, feel free anytime to pop in questions in the Q&A. And if something juicy comes up, the ladies will stop me or we'll add them on to the end of the seminar and get to your juicy irrigation frustrations or questions, and do the best to help you out.
I'm going to wrap up this poll in about 5 seconds. And we're ending. Oh, one more person. All right, here we go.
Looks like we got answers all over the board.
We did. So the question here is, what do you hope to learn from this event? And it looks like the majority of folks would like to learn how to fix their leaky irrigation system, followed by how to troubleshoot your existing system.
Yeah, those kind of go hand in hand, don't they, right? How to fix maybe it should have been check all the boxes that apply to you. But it looks like for the most part, okay, so not as many people are interested on how to adjust their time clocks. And more people it sounds like they've got some issues with their system. So we'll go ahead and keep that in mind while we're going. So hang tight, we got a couple more polls. And hang on just a second here. And we're gonna get this figured out.
In the meantime, I'd be happy to launch this second poll.
Thank you. There we go. So when they mention inline tubing throughout the garden, what that means is tubing that has emitters built into it already. So some people know what they have, some people don't know what they have. So feel free to put puzzles and nightmares on there too.
These polls are helping us get a sense of who's joining us tonight so that we can spend a little bit more time focusing on things that you all are really interested in learning about.
Okay, no nightmares, woohoo. Okay, so a few inline emitter tubing people and some black tubing with emitters throughout the garden. Great, okay. And the third poll question. Just so you know, we have 4 questions in the beginning and we have 1 at the end. So we just got a couple here to go through and then we'll be able to tailor my conversation to you. I'll go ahead and read these out loud in case people are just listening in. So the poll question is, how are you using your drip irrigation system? A, to water raised beds, B, on the perimeter of my landscape to water various plants, C, for potted plants, D, to water my entire landscape that includes various plants. Okay. Great. Okay, so the whole shebang, okay? And poll question number 4. What do you find most challenging about your drip irrigation system? To water raised beds, on the perimeter of my landscape to water various plants, for potted plants, or to water my entire landscape that includes various plants? No, that's not true. I messed that up. Sorry, that was, what do you find most challenging? Fixing minor repairs, programming the system for different times of the year, or understanding how the system operates? Sorry, I had a different question on my screen. Okay. All right, that sounds great. Fixing minor repairs, understanding how the system operates is the most interest, and then also a little interest in programming the system for different times of the year. Okay, so when I start talking about this stuff, keep in mind that I might get on a subject for a minute that you're not interested in, but hang tight. I have lots and lots of subjects. And then it might be something that you'll be interested in later that you don't know you should be interested in yet. So always keep that in mind, that you can come back to this later and re-listen to it and get to the stuff that you're really interested in. So one thing I wanted to point out before we get into the irrigation part is if you're just starting out, is to make sure that you design it right in the first place so that you don't have these troubleshooting issues to deal with later. So one thing is choosing the right plants for your climate. Don't buy plants just because they're pretty. Make sure that they're appropriate for where you live. Otherwise, you're going to end up irrigating them more than you should. Choose plants that require less maintenance. So a lot of times you can buy somebody a little, 6-inch hydrangea as a gift, but guess what it turns into? It turns into a giant monster later on. And a lot of times people plant it thinking it's going to be this cute little dainty plant, but later it takes up a lot of space and a lot of pruning, a lot of fertilizing, things like that. And then choose the right exposure for your plants. So if you have a plant that really wants to be in the shade, don't put it in the sun, because one, it may not look real great, but it also will require more maintenance as far as more water and more mulch, things like that. Amend your soil to create a healthy environment to start with. So if you have really cruddy soil that needs a little rescuing, then go ahead and work in some compost and get that soil up to a healthy environment for the plant to thrive in. And it's something that it even shows as a misspelled word is hydrozone. And it's something that's been around for a long time, but it's not even a word that's widely accepted enough that it gets spell checked every single time I use it. Basically, a hydrozone is grouping plants that have similar needs as far as water needs, but also soil, exposure, things like that. You want to make sure that the plants that you group together in the same irrigation zone all have very similar watering needs. And then choose quality irrigation products. It doesn't usually pay to buy the cheaper stuff. And the way that I look at things when I'm trying to decide on whether I want the cheap item or the quality item is I ask myself, how much more is it? Not how much is it to buy the better quality item, but how much more is it? So if the cheaper item is $10 and the higher quality item is $13, I look at it as I'm spending $3 more to get the quality item. Not that I'm spending 13, I was gonna spend the 10 no matter what, right? So get the better stuff. Don't go for the cheap stuff, and just stay with good quality. Install a smart controller or sensors at a minimum. So if you're kind of scared of diving in and using a smart controller, I understand. It can be a little bit complicated to get used to. It takes some time to get used to the system. But you can also install just sensors, rain sensors that will turn the irrigation off until it dries out, and then it'll come back to normal again. And then also apply mulch for weed suppression and also water retention. So it's proven that if you don't have mulch on your soil and you irrigate, that it evaporates faster, which means you're going to have to irrigate more and more frequently. So design it right in the first place. So, sorry about that, hold on. Just a really quick visual here is water requirements for turf in our general area around here is about 25 gallons per season per square foot. So I want you to visualize for a second a 5-gallon bucket, what that looks like. And now I want you to stack them 5 high. And imagine that there's grass growing right underneath those 5-gallon buckets. That's how much water that it takes to irrigate that little 12 by 12 inch space is 25 gallons. So 5 5-gallon buckets worth of water. Whereas if you choose plants that have lower watering needs, then you can get away with quite a bit less. Now, I'm not saying that you have to plant succulents, but just for a visual, this is about 2.5 gallons a season versus that 25. So you might say, well, how do I know what the right plant is for where I live? Okay, so there's a little thing called WUCOLS. This is the water use classification of landscape species. So this is in your list of links on there, and it's link number 11 and link right after link number 10. So basically you go in there and you find your city, and we are, tonight we're sponsored by the city of Cotati. So I've got Cotati right up here. And then you look by whatever you're looking for. So for water use, if you pick very low, that's going to be your most efficient plant for water use. And then you can pick the type of plant that you want, and it will propagate a list of plants for you. So here is what some of the lists look like in, they categorize them by types of plants as far as trees, shrubs, vines, ground cover. And that's over in this column where it says type of plant. Then it has the botanical name and the common name. So you might not know the botanical name, but if you know it by the common name, you can still find it. Then over here, and these are different regions that they have depending on where you live. And we happen to be in region 1. So if you're looking for a very low water use plant, you would look in this column here and look for something that says VL for very low, or L would be low. So if you find all the plants that you really want, you want to make sure that you put all your very lows on the same valve as your lows, and don't mix in any mediums or highs in those hydrozones. Try to keep them separated. And if you have a plant in mind that you really, really like, but it's a medium or a high water use plant, then do a little investigating on that particular plant and see if you can find an alternative that looks similar or will fit the niche of what you're trying to do, and something that's low or very low. And so here's another illustration that I took from a friend of mine, Leslie Hart from the Master Gardeners, and on hydrozoning. This is just kind of an example of separating your irrigation out into zones. So even though all of this stuff across the top is in the same geographic area, it doesn't have the same watering needs. So you can see there's this blue line that goes throughout the garden, and there's also this like magenta line that goes to the garden, but they don't water the same area. They water different plants. So they don't care about geography. They only care about watering needs. So it gives you the option of, you know, if these are trees, you might want to water those once a week, where some of these other plants might need to be watered twice a week. So you want to make sure that they're not on the same valve. And then over here, you show like this is a little veggie garden, and vegetables a lot of times need to be irrigated every day. So you certainly want them on a different valve than all the rest. The other thing is exposure. So keep in mind if it's in the sun or it's in the shade, if it's a tree versus a shrub, they should definitely be on different valves. And as far as like making maps for your irrigation controllers, this is one illustration of what a hydrozone map looks to include within the irrigation controller. So you can see across the bottom here, we have all these trees that I've shaded pink. These are the same kind of trees as these over here, but the system can only handle so much water. So they have to split this valve into two. So this gives you a good illustration that these 6 trees are on one valve, and then these 4 trees are on another. And then also we have this kind of purple and yellow hydrozone. Even though they're geographically right next to each other, they may have completely different watering needs, and that's why they're on different hydrozones. Okay, so now we're gonna move on to irrigation. I just wanted to go over a couple of things to keep in mind. If you're brand new at this and people say, well, you know, how much can I put on one drip zone? How far can I go? One of the numbers that I've tried to stick with that's easy to remember is 200. And what that means is try not to exceed 200 feet and try not to exceed 200 gallons per hour. So if you have to go farther than 200 feet, you might not be able to do all 200 gallons. So if you're going a long way, but you're not irrigating very much along that way, you might be able to go farther than the 200 feet. If you're going to be using more than 200 gallons per hour, that might be fine, but you might not be able to go more than 200 feet. So just kind of keep those numbers in your head. And when you're standing out and you're looking at your landscape and you're looking at how much irrigation is on a line, ask yourself these questions. Have I exceeded either of those? And if you have, that could be one issue that you're having. Pressure regulators, one thing I've run into is people get them confused with, you know, something that's going to create pressure for you, and that's not true. This particular pressure regulator is rated at 20 PSI. So if you only have 15, you're not going to get 20. You're only going to have the 15 that you have. So they're also important because, you know, irrigation systems are variable by the amount of pressure that's coming into them. There are some that are compensating, but there's still, you have to keep that in mind that the more oomph you push into the system, the more water typically is going to come out. So if you want to stay within the manufacturer's guidelines, you want to use a regulator that's going to keep it to the amount of pressure that it should be running at. And as far as filters, filters just help to keep your system running smoothly. And you never know when something's going to happen and you might break a line and you want to keep crud out of the system and from clogging everything up. The other thing to keep in mind is depending on where you're getting your water from, there's unique issues for all of them. So if you're getting water from you know, a municipal source, that is going to be very clean. If you're getting it from a well, there may be issues with iron or bacteria or sand. Rivers can have, you know, creeks can have all kinds of stuff, sediment, things like that in their ponds. A lot of times algae becomes an issue. And then rainwater harvesting will also have issues, mainly with pressure later on. Okay, so then also the drip systems need to have a minimum amount of water pressure, and the more sophisticated irrigation components get, the more particular they are about pressure. So there are some components that won't even open the door and let water out until you've hit the amount of pressure that they need. And that usually ranges somewhere between 7 and 20 PSI. So you want to make sure that you have enough oomph. So that takes us to this next subject of gravity-fed systems. To keep in mind that if you do put in, you know, rainwater harvesting or rain barrels, that you're not going to be operating any sprinklers. This is going to be gravity-fed, very little oomph involved in this. So for, you know, for every almost 2.5 feet of height in water, you only get one PSI. And just to put that in perspective, your house probably has somewhere between 40 and 60. So you're not going to go very far. So you have to keep in mind that it's very temperamental. And then also, like I said, quality irrigation materials are not much more expensive than poor ones. So keep that in mind. And just because you put in a drip system and they're low maintenance doesn't mean that it's no maintenance. So you got to check on your system. A lot of times it's running while you're asleep, and it should be. It should be running while you're asleep to keep evaporation down. But every once in a while, you got to turn it on and take a look. So here are the fun items for drip irrigation. Some of these may look familiar. Some of these might not. These are all just different puzzle pieces, right? This is like the Tinker Toys for adults. And we have, these bubblers, spectrum bubblers, goof plugs, micro sprinklers, flag emitters, pressure compensating, emitters with emitters built into the tubing, a larger size, filters, regulators. All of these are components of your drip system. And then this image also are all the little doodads that you can use to go around corners, because if you bend this too tight, it'll crimp, but it'll make a nice circle. But if you want to split off into more than one direction, there's T's, couplings in case you need to fix a repair. You can cut it and put a coupling in. These are all just little doodads. So like I was mentioning, some irrigation components are temperamental for pressure. So here's an example of what they call pressure compensating and non-pressure compensating. So this type of emitter on the top is non-pressure compensating, which means the more oomph you give it, the more water it's going to put out. So you can see down here for this 2 gallon per hour emitter, if you give it 10 pounds, you're going to have almost 2 gallons. But if you give it 40 PSI, you have closer to 4. So it like doubles the flow rate, which is crazy, right? So then you get to this one here, and you can see that once you hit the minimum pressure, which is about 7, it's flat all the way across. That means if you have a really long run, that you're going to get the same amount of water coming out of the emitter at the beginning versus the end. And so this next one is just kind of a visual that I have of an experiment that I did, where I took this half-gallon flag emitter and ran it for 30 seconds and then compared it when it was regulated at 19 PSI versus non-regulated, which was at about 60 PSI. And the flow actually ended up being about double. So you might ask, like, why would you ever want that? Why would you ever want an emitter that isn't pressure compensating? And it really does depend on your particular situation. If you have really short runs and you're not going very far, then there's not going to be a lot of pressure fluctuation anyway. So you could get away with something that's not pressure compensating. This particular emitter, if you ask me which is my favorite emitter, it depends on your water quality. It depends on your situation, how much pressure you have. If you have cruddy water, this is one of my favorites because you can open up the top, clean it out, and then put it back together. You'll probably get squirted in the eye a couple of times, but that's part of the process. So keep that in mind. Okay, so one of the questions I know that came in, and they talked about irrigating their vegetable beds was one of the questions. So I'm gonna bring that up right now because it's appropriate for this particular product. So this is an inline emitter tubing. This comes in 3 different flavors. This particular manufacturer makes it in 2. It's a 1/4-inch tubing, so it's pretty small. And it has emitters built into it every 6 inches or 12 inches. They also make a 9-inch one. So this is cool if you have little, vegetable beds that you want to kind of snake this around because it'll put water out, pretty close together. So for vegetable beds, my recommendation is you buy the 6-inch spacing and you put your rows pretty tight. And the reason for that is you think about what soil is inside of a raised bed. Most of the time it's imported soils. There's a lot of coarse material that, so water will flow through it pretty fast. So if you put your emitters very far apart, then it takes a while for the water to get in and scooch over and completely irrigate the entire soil. So for vegetable beds, this is a good idea, but it does have limitations, and its limitations is how far you can run it for, because it is a little tiny tube, so you can't run it very far. So I believe it's 19 feet for the 12-inch one and about, I think it's 19 feet for the 6-inch and about 30 feet for the 12-inch spacing because there's twice as many emitters in the 6-inch. Okay, and then also somebody asked about irrigating trees. So I'm going to go back to this last slide because they do show this going around trees. And I didn't know a tree farmer that did like to use this stuff because it was nice and tight to go around trees. This is also another method, more of a commercial application that I wanted to show you really quick. And this is if you're using inline emitter tubing, or even if you're just putting tubing out and poking holes and putting emitters in it, this is one method to do that. But I also want to point out the fact that how this is plumbed in is you would have the ability to cut off this inner ring layer. So when you first plant this tree, it's little, right? So you don't want to just have the outer ring because it might take a while for that water to go in and spread out. So if you put in a system for a tree and you have this initial ring and a secondary ring, you're going to get more of the root structure irrigated. And then it allows you later on to come in here and snip off this internal ring and only have the external ring, which will more closely match the drip line of the tree, where the drip line of the tree ends. So that's, and then also there was another question about how much water do you give a tree? So we don't have a lot of time to go over this, but it is in the links, and this is link number, tree irrigation. That's number 2. So this will take you, this long link down here will take you to this website that talks about how much water to give a tree. There are other calculations as far as canopy, how big is the canopy? There's also depends on the type of tree. You know, fruit trees really fluctuate during the year of how much water they need when, right? So you're not going to give it the same amount of water all the time because it depends on is it under production? Is it leafing out? Is it fruiting? Has it dropped its leaves? Things like that are things to consider. So if you go to this website here, you can read up a little bit more about that. Okay, and then somebody said,
before we move further, we had a couple of questions, two of the same question about inline emitters for 1/4-inch spaghetti. They wanted to know if it's pressure compensating.
So I'll go back to that page and I'll show you. They are not pressure compensating, not the 1/4-inch. The larger stuff is. So let me see, I'll try to zoom this in a little bit. Oops. Try to zoom in a little bit here. Okay, how's that look? You can see that pretty good? Okay, so right up here, can you see my cursor okay? So this is the 6-inch spacing. And, oh, I'm sorry, the pressure is down here. So this is the output that you get depending on how much pressure you have. So if you only have 10 PSI, each one of those emitters puts out about 4/10 of a gallon in an hour. But if you have 30 PSI, it's almost 7/10. So that's one of the reasons that they have that length restriction, is because the further you go, the more the pressure is going to poop out by the time it gets to the end. And so then you're going to have a variance that's too big and isn't within an acceptable range. So if you started out with 30 PSI at one end and you ended up with 10 PSI at the other end, the plants at the beginning are getting quite a bit more water than the ones on the end. So keep that in mind, that it's not pressure compensating, but as long as you're not losing a lot of pressure, it's, it just depends on how much pressure you have versus the Techline inline emitter tubing, which is closer to a 1/2 inch, that's pressure compensating. And has a pretty flat curve, no matter how much pressure you have. From about 14 pounds to about 50 pounds, it puts out the same amount of water. Think that covered that? Okay.
There was actually one more question in the chat where somebody asks, how do you keep the emitters on the inline emitters from getting clogged?
Okay, so that's a very good question, actually. I should have mentioned that this is a tough one because this doesn't like to be buried, first of all, right? So it's kind of a double-edged sword that we really want you to use mulch to cut down on evaporation, but we don't want you to bury it. So because it's not pressure compensating and it doesn't have a check valve in it, and a check valve is like a one-way door, like you can only go one way and you can't come back. It doesn't have that check valve like like some of the higher quality half-inch emitter style does, where water goes out, but when it shuts off, sometimes you hear it when you hear it slurping back in. So it's like kind of like gasping for air when you turn the system off. And when it does that, it can bring in some particles with it and it can clog it. So one way to help keep it from clogging, number one, is do not bury it in the soil. Number two, try to just very loosely cover it with mulch if you're going to cover it with mulch, because the mulch is going to break down too. So if you're like rotating crops, things like that, you might have to kind of scrub it off the surface and make sure that it's not in the soil. This 1/4-inch tubing does have a hole on both sides of the tube. So that's going to help. And it's kind of, because it's not like the most efficient emitter, but the holes are on both sides of the tube, which I know you're not going to be able to see this very well, but I'm going to hold it up anyway. Okay, so right here is an emitter, and this emitter has a hole on each side. And if I plug one of those holes, the water comes out more vigorously out the other side. So that's one way that it compensates, that if it did clog one hole, at least it has another one to help compensate for that. But I've had some of these clog up with minerals. And honestly, I just come along and like bend it, and it kind of like knocks it loose and will sometimes dislodge whatever was in there, or maybe it was minerals on the other side. But yeah, there's that. Anything else? Okay. All right, let's keep cruising then. All right, so how much water do your plants need? That was one question that somebody had. Now it gets a little deep here for a second, guys, so just hang tight with me. This is something you probably want to read about more later. So first of all, I took this image from quell.net in their professionals and the training materials. There's a manual for Sonoma Marin Saving Water Partnership. That is going to be link number 4. And it talks about water use classifications. So we have, low water use plants, medium water use plants, and high water use plants. And then they describe how much water you need in inches instead of gallons. So I'm going to try to knock that out for you and help you out a little bit. So here's something called CIMAS. And this is for California, and you have to find where you live in here. And for Cotati, we are in Zone 5, which is described as Northern Inland Valleys, valley north of San Francisco. And then this next chart, try not to cross your eyes too hard. I'm going to take this, try to take it easy on you. But basically, here's Area 5 that we live in. And what you want to do is, if you open up this map, is try to find where you are on this map. And then the numbers kind of like cross over a little bit. So look for the little T. So there's a little T right here. That's number 5 where we are. Like Ukiah is very challenging because it's more of 8. 8 and 4 have a big difference. So look over here at these zones and look at zone 8 and then match it up with July. That's the highest watering needs. Is you need 7.44 inches of rain equivalent to keep your plants looking good. Where zone 4 on the other side of Ukiah is 5.89. That's a mountain range that divides these two. So knowing the geography of that area kind of helps figure out which side you're on. So we are in zone 5. So here's zone 5. And I took the liberty of adding these percentages across the top. So you could kind of compare what zone 5 looks like to the rest of the year from July. So July is the highest number on this column. This is how many inches of rain you would need in July, spread out, just perfectly throughout the month to irrigate your high water use plants to give them just enough. Okay, well that doesn't happen, so you have to compensate for that 6.5 inches some other way. So now it depends on what kind of plant you have. This is a high water use plant, so this is like turf. So depending on which plant you have will determine which kind of, how much water you give it. So how to figure this out in gallons is you find your reference ET, evapotranspiration, which is all of these numbers in zone 5, times whatever the factor is for a plant factor. and then times the area, and then times 0.62. Now what 0.62 is it's a conversion to get you from inches to gallons. There's some math behind all of that, but that's what it comes down to. So in my example, we have July times a medium water use plant times an area of 4x4 times the 0.62. So then that breaks down to 6.51, which is this number here, times 0.6, which is what a medium water use plant is. And that you will get from the WUCOLS manual. And that is going to be link number 11. And then times 16, which is what 4 times 4 is an area of square feet times 0.62. What it comes down to is about 39 gallons a month you would need to irrigate 16 square feet for a medium water use plant. Or that's about 10 gallons a week. So if you can figure out how many emitters you have on something, what their flow rates are, that'll kind of help you knock that down a little bit and figure out how many gallons and how much time you need to put on it. There are some more complicated equations on that, and if it's something you really want to learn about, then you should take a closer look at the quail.net website and take a look at that curriculum and see if that's something that you're interested in. And if this just totally blows the top off your head and you don't want to hear it anymore, then we'll get into that too and find somebody that can help you with that. So somebody also asked, how frequently do I irrigate? Well, that depends on a few things. So we looked at the last slide with how many gallons do you need to apply? Now this talks a little bit about soil. So this is a demonstration of showing you what a 1 gallon per hour emitter through various different types of soil looks like when it hits the ground. So if you have really sandy soil, it's more of a straight column that goes straight down. Whereas if you have loam soil, it makes sort of a round shape. So it's going into the soil and dispersing laterally at a closer rate than it obviously is here with the coarse soil. And then also if you have clay soil, it takes a while to permeate that soil and get water into it. So you don't want to apply it too fast. So it goes in and then it laterally moves sideways. So that's a mistake a lot of people do with running their turf sprinklers, is they turn them on and they run them for 20 minutes and then water is going down the sidewalk and down the gutter, where they should have only watered it maybe for 5 minutes and done it several times a day instead of one 20-minute spurt. So the long and short of it is that coarse soils, you need to give it adequate amount of water. It can be applied at a faster rate, but it needs to be irrigated more frequently. So you don't want to give it too much water at once, like the whole bucket, and then walk away for a week, because that just won't work. Coarse soils need to be irrigated more frequently because they can only hold a little bit of water per foot. And then fine clay soils, again, you need to give it an adequate amount, but a slower application, and then infrequently because it can hold a lot of water for a longer period of time. Okay, so now talking about system evaluation. So as far as watching your system, you need to periodically evaluate it while it's running. Again, it doesn't mean you got to get out of bed at 4 o'clock in the morning, but you might want to go learn how to turn your controller on manually and run it so you can take a look. You want to seasonally adjust your system. You don't want to just turn it on in April and then turn it off in November. You want to make sure that you're monitoring the system and giving it the water that it needs based on what the season is like. Then you want to shut down your system for winter. Even if you have a smart controllers, they can get it wrong sometimes. So it's better if you know it's done for the season, go ahead and just shut it off. Don't be afraid. And then protect your equipment. Now here on the West Coast, we don't have to be as careful as because we don't have as much freezing temperatures and things that we have to worry about. But there are a few things, especially above ground equipment, that you need to protect. And then troubleshooting your irrigation problem. So let's get into that. So what you want to do when you're evaluating your system is you want to stop, look, and listen and see if you see any geysers, hear any geysers, you see any puddles, dry spots, signs of erosion, or poor performance. And I was supposed to surprise you with this picture, but I'm going to do it different instead. So one day I was at this shopping center and I get out of my car and I see this erosion and I'm like, oh, what's going on? I look down and I see that this irrigation part was broken in half. So me being the person that I am, I reached into my car and went, well, what supplies do I have? What irrigation parts do I have? Well, the mother of daughters, I had hair ties in my car. So that's what I used to do that irrigation repair for a City of Santa Rosa customer. So one thing about puddles that I've discovered is a lot of times where the puddle is not where the problem is. So you might have to go backwards and figure out where the water's coming from. But dry spots are a problem too, because what happens with dry spots is people think they need to water for longer. So if an emitter is clogged, instead of replacing the emitter, they just try to water it for longer to make it fix it. So you got to check out those dry spots and see why is it dry? What's going on? Is the tubing kinked? Is there an emitter that's plugged? You know, what's going on? Do you see that, you know, some of your irrigation, the drippers seem to be just cruising along, dripping, 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 and others are just kind of pooped out. So there's things that you can do to fix that. So the first thing you got to do is you've got to buy yourself some goof plugs. These are super cheap, and if you don't have them, you can't really make one. These aren't something that you can just, you know, it's not a spork. You can't just use a spoon or a fork. You've got to use a goof plug. It has to be a goof plug to fix certain things. And then sometimes a goof plug just isn't enough. So if an emitter is popped out and you don't know where it is and you don't really need it anymore, it's because the plant died because the emitter popped out, then put a goof plug in it and put this right into the hole. If it's a jagged hole and you put a goof plug in there and it leaks, then you're gonna have to cut it and put a coupling in it. Just cut it, cut out a little piece, you know, measure it first, and then put it back together. This is a tool that I developed after doing many irrigation audits of being tired of poking holes to find out how much water pressure the system has. So after like 12 different failures, I came up with this tool right here. Basically, it's a gauge that has a brass fitting on it that's 1/4 inch on this side, an 1/8 inch on this side. Both sides are female. And then this rubber tip right here is the tip for an air compressor gun. So it's rubbery, so it makes a great seal, and the hole that's in the end of it happens to fit very nicely over your irrigation components. So in this image right here, I'm showing it attached to this type of emitter. It fits on all of these type of emitters. And over here, it looks like I'm just sticking it on a blank tube, but if you look at the pressure rating, you'll see this is attached to an inline emitter tube over the whole of it, and you just push it on there and there it goes. So I'm gonna show you this little tiny video right here. And there's a longer version of it, which is going to be link number 1. If you want to take a look at it later, that shows a little bit more in depth the different products that you can use it for. But I'm just going to show you this really quick clip. Okay, so I'm going to take my gauge here and I'm going to put it over the outlet of these emitters so you can check and see what the pressure is while this emitter is running here. So I'm going to take this and put it right over the barb and push it down, and you will see that this emitter has about 28 pounds behind it. I'm going to move on to the next one. This one has a little bit fatter barb, but I can get it on there, push it on, 30 psi, pop it back off, move on to the Agrifin PCP emitter, put it over the barb. And as you can see, it also has 30 psi. This one's a little trickier because it doesn't have a barb, it's inline emitter tubing. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to push this right up to the hole on the emitter and hold it tight, and you'll see that it has about 24 pounds coming through it. Let's see if I can get that any higher, about 28. Then we have the Netafim woodpecker emitter. It also has somewhat of a large barb on it, but I could go ahead and wiggle that on there and get over it. It shows just about 30 psi. Okay, so where you would need that is if you have a system that you don't know what's wrong with it, but you know it's working on one end and not working on the other end. It can help you discover where the problem is happening. So instead of poking holes to find pressure readings, this is a more efficient way to do it. Okay, and then don't forget to flush. These are different mechanisms on getting to the end of your drip tubing and flushing it out for the season. This is just a compression fitting that slips over the tubing that has a cap on it. This one is called a figure 8. This is, you know, really fast. You just slide it down, open the crimp, and let it fly out. And then this one is an auto flush valve. This one flushes every time it turns on and turns off, which can be wasteful. But if you have a lot of minerals in your water or any kind of crud in your water, this is a good way to kind of get it out each time so that it doesn't sit on the inside of the pipe and eventually clogging things up. So my water use efficiency side of me says, put this near a plant that can actually use the water that comes out of it. And then here's a quick demonstration of just flushing your line. And that's basically all there is to it. So when you open up your lines to flush them, you want to kind of stand there for a second and look. And if there's lots of crud coming out, or it's dark, or it's green, or it's brown, you want to let it run long enough until that stuff comes out clear. And the reason why when you open up the ends that it flushes out is it makes the water move faster in the pipe than it normally does under normal operations, because it adds more velocity to the pipe. And when you add more velocity to the pipe, what happens is it knocks all the stuff off the sides of the wall. So stuff that was just kind of hanging tight, waiting to clog up your emitters at any moment, then you knock it off and then it comes out the end. So you want to get that flushed out. Now, one problem you might run into is if you don't know where the end is. Like if you've inherited a system and you're like, okay, great, where's the end? And you're looking and looking and looking, trying to find it. Well, don't give it too much thought. You can always just add an end. So what you want to do is try to find some place where you can add in a T and then just put in a short piece of pipe and put in your own flush valve. And then do something like put a rock on top of it, put a gnome on top of it, put something on top of it that you'll remember where it is later on, and you'll be able to go out and flush it out. And then these are all different types of filters that you can have on your drip system. Most of the time they're going to look, you know, something like this one on the bottom. You have to open it up and clean it. So before you put your system away for the winter, you don't want to put it away with a dirty filter, because then it's just going to be that much harder to clean it up. So when you start up in the spring, you're going to want to take a look at it. And then depending on your water quality will kind of dictate how frequently you have to come back and look at these. So if you have any kind of water that has a lot of organics in it, you want to come back frequently and clean these out. And if these are always clogging up, then you need a bigger one that has more filter surface area so that you don't have to be cleaning it as often. And these are just a couple of different like hose bib, hose threaded types. This is the inside of what it looks like. It has a cap on the end that you unthread, pull the screen out. This is also another, just a hose thread style. Some of these have built-in pressure regulators. Some are screens, some are discs. Whatever they are, you got to get them cleaned out. And then as far as winterizing your stuff, here's one thing you got to do. So if you have a hose bib timer, that's fine. But during the winter, these should not be outside. And the reason for that is this space between where the faucet is and the timer begins, this has water in it all of the time, unless you turn this faucet off. And even if you turn that off, there's still water in it until it turns on the next time. So you want to make sure that you turn the faucet off, take this off of there because it can freeze right here. And then you can always just try to leave enough slack in this portion of your system that you can take this and thread it back on where the timer used to be in case you want to manually irrigate. Like in October, you might take it off because you know it's time to start cutting back on your irrigation, but then all of a sudden it seems a little dry, then you can come back and manually water it. You want to put these guys to bed for the winter. These are a couple other components. Anything that has water in it all the time and it's above ground should be protected with something. You've probably seen these pillows out there. These are more of a commercial application, but just to show you that you need to protect anything that has water in it all of the time. Okay, so real quick, I'm going to give you just an anatomy lesson on a valve. This is an anti-siphon valve, which is a popular type of valve on the West Coast. Water comes in here on this side. This side has water in it all the time, and when it turns on, it opens up and lets water go out the other side. This is called a globe valve, which is also a popular item, but is put in the ground. And it also has the same type of principle as far as it lets water go in and but it doesn't have the backflow prevention like an anti-siphon valve does. So this is opening the anti-siphon side of the valve, and in it is a little float device which caps this off during operation and doesn't let water drain out of it. When the system shuts off, it prevents water from flowing back. This is the flow control of the valve. This is the electrical solenoid of the valve. This is how it operates when the controller sends a signal to the valve. It opens up and will turn on. So this is a demonstration right here. If you look at this spot right here, you'll see where the plunger is, no power to it. And then this is an illustration of what happens when the controller sends power to the solenoid. It sucks it up inside. And then I'll show you why that's important here in just a second. So this solenoid goes into this compartment, this little baby hole right here. When this thing lifts up, it allows water released off the top of the diaphragm to start flowing into the system. So that's how that works. Okay. All right, so these particular valves are called jar top valves because they open like a jar. You spin the parts off of them. They're usually really tight and you might need a pair of channel lock pliers to open them up, but they're super easy to work on. There's not a lot going on. So in this side of the valve, the only thing in there is a diaphragm and a spring, very little things in there. So if you take that out and there's any kind of black gunk on your hands, it's time to replace it. And if you're inspecting the valve to see if there's what's going on, you're going to want to check here and see if there's anything going on. And then it's real easy to just put it right back together again, hand tight. Now this one right here was a common problem back when I used to work in irrigation supply, that when people would install these, they would put them in the on position. Well, the on position means manually on, and it's going to stay on forever until you push it back to off. Because like I showed you how it works electronically, it needs to be in the off position for that plunger to come up and for it to operate. Okay, this is where the manual bleed screw is. This also releases pressure off the top of the diaphragm and lets water go out. So if you have any crud stuck in the valve, this is one way to try to dislodge it. It's also another way to turn it on, but this screw will fall all the way out if you go too far. The other thing is the valve will stay on forever until you put it back in all the way. And then there's the flow control. Okay, so this valve is very similar. It also has a flow control on the top. It has a diaphragm and a spring in the middle. It's a little bit more particular about how it goes back in because it has, a different shape to it, which is common for a lot of valves. It also has a similar solenoid, only it's what they call captive. It doesn't have the ability to fall out of there. Okay. Any questions before we move on? Okay, great. So replacing a valve solenoid, same kind of valve. I'm going to show you real quick how to do that. This is one of the questions that was sent in ahead of time. So this is an anti-siphon valve. First of all, this is not to code. This valve should be 6 to 12 inches higher than the highest outlet that it serves. Otherwise, when the system shuts off, water might drool out of the top of this cap, because when water comes back, it tries to go back, and to prevent that from happening, this automatically will drain water out of the cap. So if you have a valve that does that, then ask yourself, is it higher than the highest outlet it serves? If it isn't, then that's what's going on. In this particular situation, this is all downhill from here. It's still not to code, but it's all downhill, so that it doesn't have that problem. Its problem is periodically the plunger gets hung up in it, so it's time to replace the solenoid. This is an older model. It doesn't have that manual on and off. And this is a closer look at what we're working with here. And this is the brand new solenoid that we're going to be putting on that valve. And then the type of wire connectors I'm going to use, some people think these are old school, but I am a little old school. So I'm just going to be honest here. These are some of my favorites. These are called dry splice connectors. and you'll see that they have some goo inside of here, okay? That's to keep dirt, water, and everything else out. So we're gonna connect the wires this way. First thing I'm gonna do is I have to shut the water off to this valve to make sure that it doesn't turn on. As soon as I pull that solenoid off, it's gonna take the plunger off of that little baby hole and it will stay on forever. And you'll probably get nailed right in the eye for sure if you take that off. So just to warn you. So I'm gonna turn the water all the way off. And then what I'm gonna do before I get cocky is I'm going to release all the pressure off of that valve to make sure I shut off the right valve. There's actually two valves sitting over here. So I open up this bleed screw and see, does it open up with full pressure or does it just kind of gurgle or what happens? So I picked the right valve. I was able to shut it all the way off. So I did that by turning the screw. Okay, so next, here it is where I pull the solenoid off. Now this is an older style. The one that I showed you earlier had a little white thing holding it in, and now it's just a little retainer. Thank goodness they put that in, because people that didn't know what was up would take these off, that little plunger would fall out. This thing right here, they would lose it, it would fall in the rocks, right? And you'd never find it again. And that means the valve will stay open forever and ever until you replace it, because that plunger is sitting on top of this hole, right? Okay, so you got to be careful about that. So I got that solenoid off, and now I'm just going to put this new one on that has that little retainer in it. So if it looks different, don't be scared. It's just got to fit right. This one fits perfectly. I could turn the water on right now if I wanted to, but I'm going to wait until I'm all done just in case. So now I've got to cut these wires. So there's no power on. I didn't turn the valves on while I was doing this, so there is no electricity going through here. And this is very low power also. Plus I'd have to cut both wires at the same time. So anyway, cutting the wires, and then I'm going to strip them back and pull out about 3/8 of an inch wire in both of them. And then take a look at this little guy. It has these 3 holes. You need to put one wire from the solenoid in through one hole and one of the control wires in through a different hole. You can't put them in the same hole or kind of defeats the purpose. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pull the wires through. And then you have this copper crimp. So I've twisted the wires together, and then I put this copper crimp over the top and I squeeze it down so it's making contact with both wires. Okay, see there it looks, there's the finished part of it. So I have the 2 wires, one from the controller, one from the valve going in there. And then I'm going to take that little gooey guy and stick the wires into that and then put it inside of that drum. And that one is all done. And then I just repeat the process with the second one. And that is all there is to that. So hopefully you can feel empowered to get that done. Okay, so now we're going to talk about controllers here. So irrigation troubleshooting. I'm going to tell you the #1 thing that people would come in and complain to me about their controllers is they felt like it was running all the time. It would run, and then later on they'd come back out and be running again. So what's going on? So think about this. So on this controller, it shows start time 1, start time 2, start time 3. Well, a lot of people thought that meant valve number 1, valve number 2, valve number 3, but that's not what it is. What it means is if you tell valve number 1 to irrigate for 10 minutes, but you tell it to start at 5 a.m., 6 a.m., and 7 a.m., it's going to come on for 10 minutes each time you told it to come on. So that's a total of 30 minutes, not a total of 10 minutes. So number of start times is something that is #1 that people get wrong. So you want to go to your controller, turn it to start times, and see what you have in start time #1 in your display. Then turn it to start time number 2 and start at time number 3, and see if there's anything in there. And just keep in mind that whatever is in that program is going to run that many times. Okay, so check and make sure that you have more than one run time, and then also make sure that your valves aren't in more than one program. So here's the slider that has program A, program B, and program C. So what is a program? So what the programs are for helping you get your hydrozones dialed in really well. So I'm going to give an example of that illustration we had earlier. We had trees we had shrubs, and we had veggie garden. So we don't want to water the trees every day, but we also don't want to water the veggie garden once a month. So those valves cannot be in the same program. So if program A is for the veggie beds, you might want those to water every single day, Sunday through Saturday. Where valve number 2 might be for the trees, where that could be in some of the more advanced programs, probably eventually to once every 14 days, once every month. So you definitely don't want them in the same program. And then program C could be the shrubs, where you might want to water them once a week or twice a week, something like that. So you got to keep that in mind on your programs and your start times. Those are the #1 things that people do incorrectly. So then we're going to talk a little bit seasonal adjustment. If you're scared of your controller, this is one thing you should feel empowered about, is seasonal adjust. So when you first program your controller, normally you would program it for whatever it needs in July, and then the only buttons you need to really mess with is seasonal adjustment. So what seasonal adjustment does is, right now, if it was July, seasonal adjustment on the display would show 100%, and then we would adjust it down. We're going to get into that a little bit more. Oops. Hold on. Here we go. I forgot this was a video. Okay. So there's the seasonal adjustment on that one. And then we have, this is a different model. This is a rain dial made by Irritrol. Its seasonal adjustment is kind of hidden a little bit in its special functions, but it's there. You just got to know how to get to it. And then this is an older model of the Hunter Pro C, where it also has seasonal adjustment. So you want to make sure you have the current time in your controller, and then you want to get to your seasonal adjustment. And when you're first doing the controller, you want to make sure that it's on 100%, so that it shows 100 there. And then as the season goes along, say October, you come along and go, okay, what is the percentage of irrigation that I need compared to July? And if it's about 45%, you would plug that in here. And what that's going to do is it's going to change all of your run times for you. So if 100% was 10 minutes to run on zone number 1, if you change it to 45%, I believe it's going to water for 5 minutes, because it's not going to do 4.5. But it's automatically going to do the math for you. So you don't have to remember every month, do 2 minutes down, 1 minute up. You don't have to worry about that. You plug it in for July, and then you seasonally adjust. So the minimum you should do is go out once a month and do this, but we're going to get into that a little bit deeper in just a minute on how to keep track of that. So this one here shows that it's 100% up in the display. And then when you use the seasonal adjustment, I've dialed it down to 50%. And now this one, it was 10 minutes before, and now it shows 5 minutes. Okay, and then start times, you just got to pay attention that this has a start time of 5 a.m. And then you want to go back and make sure that your other start times are off if you really do not want a second start time or third. And then here's your programs, so in this particular program, program A, it's going to water on Tuesdays. And on program B, it's going to be off. Okay, and then seasonal adjustment on all of these controllers. It's somewhere on your controller. If your controller does not have a seasonal adjustment, or if it's not a smart controller, then you should get one that at least has seasonal adjustment. And smart controllers are getting pretty smart. My smart controller, I can operate with my phone at any time. This last month where it was really, really dry, I was trying to be as conservative as I could. But every once in a while, things would start to look a little dreary. So I can go ahead and just turn it on right from my phone. You don't have to go to the garage. It's right there, and you can monitor it easily. Okay, and then don't be afraid to turn it off. It's really easy. You don't have to put minutes in at 0. You just go over and you turn it off. Somewhere between October and November, when it starts raining, just go ahead and turn it off. If you have a system that is, under cover, that might not get rained on, you just got to keep track of that one. But don't be afraid to just go ahead and turn it off. Okay, and we looked at this one earlier. This was CIMIS. Again, here's those percentages. So if you can do this math here, or just screenshot this or take it down later on, I've done the percentages for you. So that on that seasonal adjustment, in July, it's 100%. In August, you're gonna have a hard time typing in 91. It's usually in 5 or 10% increments. So you'd probably turn it down to 90. September is 69%. So you'd turn that one to 70. And then October is 48%. So you want to turn that one down to 50. And then I'm going to take it, let's see here. We're going to take it one step further here in just a minute. Okay, so here are smart controllers. So smart controllers do that seasonal adjustment part for you. So that way you don't have to wonder what percentage is October of July. Smart controllers already know what percentage they are. And well, how do they know? Well, some of them are very localized. They take local weather conditions. Some of them are from satellite. Some of them are just right on your property, depending on which type of model you prefer to use. But here you can show in this illustration down here is that this blue line is how much water you need and what month. And this black line is how much water you're getting from rainfall. So you can see where we live, we don't get any rainfall in the summertime. So we really have to watch ourselves. So smart controllers can do a lot of that work for you. And then also here's another illustration of different seasons and what percentage of water needs are. So in August, here it's 90% of July, where October is about half of what you need in July. So here's a little chart that I made that also shows, it shows Petaluma on here, but this is because I'm using Petaluma's weather station, which is just very friendly neighbors to Cotati. So their watering needs are very close. So you can see on here, what I did on this chart is showing you the percentages like I did on the other one. But I also put down here a little something to keep track of. So I show the controller being off in January, February, March. And then once April comes around, rainfall amounts start dropping, and the amount of water that it needs in rainfall equivalent is a little over 4 inches. So you want to monitor it. If it doesn't rain anymore in April, you want to go ahead and turn on the irrigation controller. And then you're going to leave it on May, June, July, August, September. And then when October comes around, that's really for me, October is really the wild card. Because one, sometimes it rains, sometimes it doesn't. It's also, we have a lot of hot days still, even though plants are starting to get tired and want to go to sleep, you still got to keep track of them. And then there's also wind, and wind can also increase the need for water. And then once November gets here, you just turn it back off again. And there are ways that you can add sensors to your irrigation systems to make them smart if they aren't already. Okay, poll question time. See how everybody is feeling.
Kris, we have one question from Leslie Hart, and she wants to know, are controllers with seasonal adjustments or rain sensors smart controllers? And if not, what are they called?
Okay, so good question, Leslie. Thank you. Let me go back to this one right here. So they're only smart controllers if they have the ability to at least sense the weather. So there's some controllers that are not smart that you can add features to them to make them smart. So this particular model that I'm showing here is what Hunter's version of making their traditional controller into a smart controller. So this one here, if you buy a solar sink, what it has is it has some data stored inside of it, and you tell it where zone you live in, and it gives you a guide of telling it where you live. And then it has historical data in it. So it makes some predictions of what the weather should be like, depending on where you live. But it also takes real time, like what's going on right now. So if it's unseasonably cool in July, then it will make an adjustment for that period of time instead of just, irrigating as much as it has to. So these are just modified if they don't have some way to detect heat and rain, then they're just sensors. These are just sensors that shut off when it's either raining or freezing, and then that's it. So those aren't considered smart. They're better, but they're not smart. Okay, let's do the how are you feeling? We're narrowing down on how much time we have, and we're just wrapping things up here. Okay, how are we feeling? Are you guys ready to rock and roll on either tackling some of your repairs or doing an irrigation system? Does this make you want to hire some help? Does it make you want to take an irrigation course and learn some more? Or perhaps help with an installation so that you can learn a little bit more in somebody else's property. And then that way you don't have to worry about making the mistakes on yours and you can learn as you go. And remember, we're going to be sending you in a response email a whole list of links that I have forgotten to mention some of the things. So when you get it, you want to click on the hyperlinks and take a look for yourself on some of the items on there to see if they were a little deeper dive into what we've talked about. Okay. So we might have went a little deep, ladies, on the interested in hiring help is 40%. Okay, good. Hey, lots of interest though. Some people are ready to rock and roll. Some people want to take a class. Okay, well, that takes me into the very next slide here. So here is one option. So right now I'm teaching a landscape irrigation course, which also includes the Qualified Water Efficient Landscaper certification. For folks that just want to do things in their own yards or do this for a profession or want to take take it up a notch and get a certificate. I'm teaching that right now at Mendocino College, and that's getting ready to wrap up pretty soon. Santa Rosa Junior College, it's hosted in the spring, and that schedule is online right now. So if you are interested in registering there, that's going to be link number 9 is going to take you to that, but you can also just go to santarosa.edu and check it out. And then also the QUEL program, like I said, is the Qualified Water Efficient Landscaper program. And it's a way for landscapers to get a little bit more street cred with their knowledge. It teaches them a little bit more about figuring out what people did wrong. So it's one thing to take an irrigation course on how to design it right in the first place, but what QUEL does is really helps you figure out what happened. And how to repair things and how to water budget and things like that. So if you are interested in that, you can go to quell.net. And then if you want to get to that textbook that is a free book, you go to training info and then you find the curriculum. And we are the Sonoma Marin Saving Water Partnership area. But that's a good way of taking it up a notch. You can also just read the curriculum for your own personal interest. And then, of course, there's always the fabulous option of helping Daily Acts with an install project. And we're lucky enough that we have a couple of them coming up in a couple days. They have the sheet mulching project. And then on December 5th, they're going to be installing the planting and the irrigation on this. So if you want to give them a hand, you can. Is there any more questions?
Is that all for your slides, Kris?
That is all I have. Are there any questions waiting? Or are we good?
So if anybody has any additional questions, go ahead and answer them or put them in the question answer box, and we'll get to them right at the end here. I just have a few more things that I wanted to share with you guys tonight. So I'll go ahead and share my screen again really quick, Kris. Perfect. So yeah, as Kris already mentioned, we do have 2 upcoming in-person events at the beautiful Paula Lane Preserve in Petaluma. It's an 11-acre property that is owned and managed by the city of Petaluma, and it's protected by a conservation easement. But we have a few small projects that we're going to be doing out there in the coming weeks. One of them is going to be this Saturday. We're going to be doing a sheet mulching installation there. And then in 2 weeks from that, we'll be doing a native hedgerow planting and a drip irrigation installation. The Daily Acts team is actually going out tomorrow to install some irrigation valves. So if you're interested in learning more about irrigation installation, you can see it. We can explain it all out to you, and you can help us install a drip irrigation system from scratch. So it'd be great hands-on experience for you. I also wanted to reiterate that we are being very careful with everything with COVID right now. We're really enforcing 6 feet of distance. We're sanitizing all of our tools. Everybody has to wear masks. We had an event last weekend that went really great, and it was just so nice to see everybody out in the field again. So if you're so inclined, you can sign up on our website at dailyaxe.org/upcoming events. If you're not feeling so inclined to do in-person events right now, we do have a couple of scheduled webinars and virtual events coming up as well. We have a visual tour of native wildflower meadows coming up. The pictures look gorgeous. It's by 2 acclaimed photographers, Rob and Nita. It's on our website. I love the photos that they took of Carrizo Plain. It's a beautiful place. So highly encourage you check that out. And then Daily Axe is also going to be featured in the Bioneers 2020 conference. Our executive director, Traythan, is going to be giving a keynote and a couple other speeches throughout. And the whole thing is virtual this year, and it's only $20 a day to attend, which is a really unique opportunity. So you could also find more information about that on our website. We love our sponsors. Just wanted to give a quick shout out to everybody who supports Daily Axe work, and especially relevant today is Wyatt Irrigation Company. We go to them for a lot of our irrigation needs. We especially love the Petaluma store. They're super helpful all the time. So if you ever have any irrigation questions and you need someone's help, we highly recommend you go check them out. And just thank you so much for coming today. If you had any questions, feel free to reach out to me as well. You can reach me at serena@dailyaxe.org. And then now is the time. If anybody has any additional questions, we'd be more than happy to answer them. And Kris, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We always love learning from you. Like, we just have so much to learn from you every time. We're so grateful for your time.
Thank you. It's fun. It's great to be able to get on my soapbox. And, you know, I do want to point out that I know for myself, after leaving a seminar thinking, oh, what did I want to ask them? And I totally forget. And then I remember later on is you can always reply when you get the email with the links. You can reply your questions and they'll send them over to me and I can get them answered for you later on. But it's been a pleasure and I always have fun with you ladies and glad to be part of it.
Okay, well, if nobody has any questions, then we're going to wrap up. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us tonight and have a wonderful night.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.